You won't believe what happened when a simple man, dressed in ordinary clothes, walked into one of the city's most luxurious dealerships. What began as an ordinary afternoon turned into one of the greatest lessons in humility anyone could ever receive. And I guarantee the ending of this story will leave you completely speechless. It was a typical autumn Tuesday when it all began. I was passing through the city's most upscale area. That area where every square meter is worth a fortune, where mirrored buildings reflect the blue sky, and where only the most expensive cars drive the impeccably clean streets. It was there that I witnessed one of the most absurd and yet most revealing situations about human nature I've ever seen in my life. The Premium Motors dealership was the kind of place that impresses even those who know nothing about cars. Situated on a prime corner, the glass and stainless steel building gleamed like a polished diamond. Automatic tempered glass doors opened onto a room that resembled a modern art gallery. The Italian marble floor reflected strategically placed LED lights, creating an ambiance that whispered of luxury in every detail. At the center of this automotive temple, cars were displayed like true works of art. There was a red Ferrari that cost more than an entire house, a yellow Lamborghini that looked like something out of a science fiction film, and a black Rolls-Royce that exuded elegance and power. Each vehicle had its own special lighting, and small gold plaques indicated prices that would make any ordinary person dizzy. The salespeople at Premium Motors were in a league of their own. All dressed in impeccable Italian suits, mirror-polished genuine leather shoes, and with a demeanor that made it clear they weren't there to serve just anyone. These men and women had been trained to identify, in a matter of seconds, who had the right financial profile for their position. It was almost as if they possessed an internal radar to detect the size of the bank account of each person who walked through those glass doors. The store's general manager was Marcus Rodriguez, a man in his 40s who had built his career selling expensive dreams to the wealthy. Marcus was approximately 6 feet tall, with black hair always slicked back with imported gel, and he wore designer glasses that cost more than 3 months' minimum wage. His navy blue suit was always impeccable, as was his Italian silk tie, which he constantly adjusted in a gesture that had become almost a nervous tic. Marcus had started as a junior salesman 15 years earlier, but his ability to read people and his knack for making wealthy customers feel special quickly propelled him to the top of the dealership's hierarchy. He knew every detail of each car, from the most complex technical specifications to the stories behind each unique model. Most importantly, he knew exactly how to make a customer fall in love with a vehicle and open their wallet without hesitation. But Marcus had a flaw he considered a strength. His ability to judge people by their appearance was almost surgical. Within seconds, he could determine whether someone was a real customer or just a time waster. This skill, which he had honed over the years, made him extremely efficient at focusing his attention only on the people who truly mattered to the store's bottom line. That Tuesday afternoon, Marcus was reviewing some contracts in his glass-walled office, from where he could observe all the action. Premium Motors had a steady stream of visitors, business people checking out new releases, collectors in search of rare models, and occasionally young heirs spending their parents' inheritance on expensive toys. Marcus knew each type of client and knew exactly how to approach them. It was around 3 in the afternoon when the automatic doors opened and a man entered the salon. At first glance, he seemed completely out of place in this ultra-luxurious setting. He was about 45 years old, of average height, and had what anyone would describe as ordinary appearance. His brown hair was slightly tousled, as if he had just come from a windy walk. He wore a simple navy cotton t-shirt, faded jeans that had seen better days, and a pair of white sneakers that were clearly not from a famous brand. What stood out most was not only his simple attire, but also his completely relaxed posture. While most visitors to premium motors entered with a certain reverence, almost intimidated by the luxurious surroundings, this man walked with the naturalness of someone entering his own home. His hands were casually in his jeans pockets, and he observed the cars with a curious gaze, but without the expression of amazement Marcus was accustomed to seeing. The salespeople near the entrance immediately noticed the new visitor. Laura, a blonde saleswoman who had worked at the company for 3 years, took a quick look at the man and immediately returned her attention to the documents she was organizing. Ricardo, another experienced salesperson, didn't even look up from the computer where he was typing a proposal for a real client who would arrive in an hour. The simple-looking man began walking slowly through the room, observing each vehicle with genuine attention. He stopped first in front of the red Ferrari, a model that cost the equivalent of a luxury home. He leaned in slightly to observe the interior details through the glass, his eyes taking in every detail of the carbon fiber dashboard and Italian leather seats. Marcus watched everything from his office, and the more he saw, the more his irritation grew. It was obvious to him that this man was in no position to buy even the cheapest car in the lot. Worse still, he was contaminating the environment with his inappropriate presence. What if a real customer walked in at that moment and saw this ordinary person milling about among the cars as if he were a potential buyer? The visitor continued his silent walk, stopping now in front of a metallic blue Porsche. This time, he moved even closer, observing not only the exterior but also trying to peer through the windows to analyze the interior. His eyes held a peculiar concentration, as if he were mentally noting every detail, every specification, every design element. It was when the man walked toward the yellow Lamborghini that Marcus decided he'd seen enough. That particular model was a limited edition costing over $2 million, and seeing someone inappropriate so close to him deeply bothered him. Marcus straightened his Italian tie, checked his suit for impeccable condition, and walked out of his office toward the unwelcome visitor. As he walked purposefully through the room, Marcus activated his environment manager mode. Over the years, he had developed a subtle but effective technique for discouraging visitors who didn't fit Premium Motors' clientele profile. It wasn't necessary to be directly rude. Just use the right tone of voice and ask the right questions, and most people got the message and left on their own. The simple-looking man was now examining the details of the Lamborghini's wheel when Marcus approached with his professional smile, the one that didn't reach his eyes and that any minimally perceptive person would recognize as fake. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, stopping at a distance that made it clear he wasn't there for friendly conversation. "Can I help you with anything?" The man calmly straightened and turned to Marcus. His eyes were brown and held a serene, almost amused expression. "Good afternoon," he replied in a calm voice. "I'm just browsing. You have some very interesting pieces here." Marcus immediately noticed that the man showed no sign of intimidation or discomfort. In fact, he seemed completely at ease, as if such conversations were routine for him. This irritated Marcus even more, because most people in similar situations would have already gotten the message and begun discreetly heading for the exit. "Interesting, yes," Marcus agreed, adjusting his tie again. "They're all exclusive models, some unique in the country. Are you looking for something specific or just curious?" The word curiosity was pronounced with an intonation that made it clear Marcus didn't approve of curious people in his establishment. The man, however, seemed unaware of the insinuation or simply chose to ignore it. "Actually, I'm considering making an acquisition," the visitor replied, turning his attention to the Lamborghini. "This model has some technical specifications that really interest me." Marcus had to make a considerable effort to maintain his professional expression. The idea that this man dressed as if he'd just stepped out of a popular mall would consider purchasing a $2 million car was so absurd it was offensive. "I see," Marcus said, crossing his arms in a way that signaled skepticism. "And have you had a chance to check the value of this particular model?" The simple-looking man smiled softly, a smile that Marcus interpreted as ingenuity, but in fact carried a complexity the manager couldn't decipher. "I imagine it's substantial," the visitor replied, "but that doesn't particularly concern me. When something really interests me, price tends to be secondary." This response left Marcus feeling a mixture of disbelief and growing irritation. In his 15-year career, he'd seen all kinds of people trying to pass themselves off as someone they were not. Young people with their parents' credit cards pretending to be successful business people, people in debt fantasizing about a life they couldn't have, and even some who seemed to genuinely believe they could buy luxury cars with their paltry savings. But I'd never met someone who maintained such a convincing facade while being so obviously out of place. The man spoke with the calmness of someone who truly didn't care about money, but his appearance screamed otherwise. It was as if he were playing a role, but even he didn't know the script. "Well," Marcus said, deciding to subtly increase the psychological pressure, "this particular Lamborghini costs $2,200,000. It's a limited edition, only 50 units produced worldwide. Delivery time, if there was real interest, would be 8 months, with a 50% down payment." Marcus pronounced the numbers with the precision of a court sentence, watching his visitor's reaction closely. He expected to see signs of shock, embarrassment, or at least a hesitation that would confirm his suspicions about the person's inadequacy in this environment. Instead, the man simply nodded, as if Marcus had mentioned the price of a coffee. 8 months is a reasonable time frame for a one-of-a-kind piece, he commented, returning to his examination of the car's details. And the down payment wouldn't be a problem either. At this point, Marcus began to feel genuinely offended. Not only that this man was wasting his time, but that he was doing so in such a blatant, almost mocking way. Other customers in the store began to notice the conversation, and Marcus couldn't allow his professional reputation to be damaged by such a ridiculous situation. Laura, the blonde saleswoman, had stopped organizing her documents and watched the interaction with growing curiosity. Ricardo also looked up from his computer, clearly intrigued by the seemingly inappropriate visitor's persistence. Even some customers elsewhere in the salon began to pay attention to the unfolding situation. An elegant couple inspecting a Mercedes were talking in whispers, clearly commenting on the strange presence of the poorly dressed man in the exclusive setting. A middle-aged woman, dressed in clearly expensive clothes and carrying a handbag that cost more than a luxury car, watched the scene with an expression of barely concealed disapproval. Marcus realized he was becoming the center of attention, but not in the positive way he was used to. His reputation as an efficient and perceptive manager was being questioned by his apparent inability to handle this embarrassing situation. He needed to resolve this quickly before other real customers began to feel uncomfortable with his inappropriate presence. "Look," Marcus said, completely abandoning subtlety and adopting a more direct tone. "I appreciate your interest in our vehicles, but I need to be honest with you. Our clientele has a very specific profile, and our cars are significant investments that require a very solid financial situation." The man turned fully to Marcus, and for the first time, his expression showed slight surprise. Not surprise at the value of the cars or the complexity of the purchase, but surprise at the direction the conversation had taken. "I understand your concern," the visitor replied calmly, "and you're right about the need for a solid financial position for acquisitions of this kind. I can assure you that wouldn't be an impediment." Marcus's patience had reached its limit. This man was clearly toying with him, and worse still, he was doing it in front of other customers and employees. It was time to be more direct, even if it meant completely abandoning the diplomacy he normally employed in these situations. "With all due respect," Marcus said, raising his voice slightly to ensure his message was clear, "but I've been in this business for 15 years. I've developed a knack for spotting serious clients versus people who are just exploring fantasies." The word fantasies was pronounced with a disdain that left no room for ambiguous interpretation. Marcus had crossed the line from professional education into clearly hostile territory. Other clients in the salon completely stopped their own activities to observe what was turning into a public confrontation. Laura and Ricardo exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly embarrassed by their boss's handling of the situation. The simple-looking man remained silent for a few seconds, his eyes studying Marcus with an intensity the manager misinterpreted as intimidation. In truth, those eyes were making a far more complex and insightful assessment than Marcus could have imagined. "I understand your position," the visitor finally said, his voice maintaining that disturbing calm. "And I respect your professional experience. Perhaps I can clear up some misunderstandings." Marcus crossed his arms again, a body posture that signaled resistance and skepticism. "Please be my guest," he replied, but his tone made it clear that nothing the man could say would change his assessment of the situation. "Well," the visitor continued, putting one hand in the pocket of his faded jeans, "I'm really interested in making a substantial purchase, not just of this Lamborghini, but possibly of other models as well." The mention of other models made Marcus mentally roll his eyes. Now the man wasn't just fantasizing about buying a $2 million car, but multiple luxury cars. The situation was becoming almost comical in its absurdity. "Multiple models," Marcus repeated, making no attempt to hide his skepticism. "I see, and may I ask what the nature of your business would be that would allow for this kind of investment?" Marcus had asked the question on purpose, hoping to expose the inconsistency between the man's appearance and his grandiose claims. It was a tactic he had used many times before, with effective results. Confronting people directly about their financial standing usually made them back down quickly. "I work with technology," the man replied simply, "developing innovative systems and solutions." "Mind." To Marcus, this answer sounded like another vague cliché. Technology had become the default answer for anyone trying to sound important without providing concrete details. Beginning programmers, computer technicians, electronics salespeople, they all described themselves as working with technology. "How interesting," Marcus said, his sarcasm now fully exposed. "And this technology work generates enough financial returns for multi-million-dollar investments in luxury automobiles?" The question was asked in a tone that made it clear Marcus considered any honest, positive answer impossible. He was essentially calling the man a liar in front of the entire store. The visitor smiled again, that same calm smile that had irritated Marcus from the start. "Yes," he replied simply, "it generates more than enough results." At this point, Marcus decided he'd wasted enough time on this charade. He had real clients to serve, real contracts to close, and he couldn't allow his afternoon to be completely wasted by someone who was clearly playing him. "Look, friend," Marcus said, completely abandoning any pretense of professional courtesy, "I'm going to be very blunt with you. This is a luxury car dealership, not a showroom for the curious. Our clients are established business people, high-level executives, people with proven net worth." Marcus gestured toward the other customers present, as if to contrast their adequacy with the obvious inadequacy of the unwelcome visitor. "Our cars aren't dream cars or fantasy objects," Marcus continued, his voice now clearly hostile. "They're serious investments for people with serious resources. And frankly, based on everything I'm seeing here, I don't believe you fit that profile." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room had completely stopped their activities to observe the confrontation Marcus had made public. Laura seemed genuinely mortified by the way her boss was treating a potential client, regardless of her suspicions about the man's financial standing. The visitor remained silent for several seconds, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. When he finally spoke, his voice maintained the disconcerting calm that had characterized the entire interaction. "I understand your assessment," he said, And I can see how you reached those conclusions based on superficial appearances. Marcus interpreted this response as a veiled admission that his suspicions were correct. The man was finally acknowledging that he didn't belong in that environment and that his claims about purchasing power were indeed fanciful. Exactly, Marcus said, feeling vindicated. Appearances can be deceiving sometimes, but they're usually quite revealing about people's true circumstances. It was at this point that the visitor did something completely unexpected. Instead of retreating in embarrassment or continuing to argue futilely, he calmly reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a simple black leather wallet. From his wallet, he extracted a small white card and handed it to Marcus with a casual, almost disinterested gesture. "Perhaps this will help clear up some misunderstandings," he said with his usual calm. Marcus picked up the card, expecting to see something ridiculous like a business card from a local computer company or some other insignificant credential. He didn't even look at the card immediately, so certain was he that it wouldn't contain anything that would change his assessment of the situation. "I'll leave you to your proper clients," the visitor said, calmly heading for the exit. "Perhaps we'll meet again under different circumstances." Marcus watched the man walk toward the automatic doors, feeling completely satisfied with how he had handled the awkward situation. He had protected his store's exclusive environment, maintained proper customer service standards, and demonstrated to everyone present that he could distinguish between genuine customers and inappropriate individuals. It was only after the visitor had completely left and the automatic doors closed behind him that Marcus casually looked down to see the card he still held in his hand. What he saw made his blood run cold instantly. But that shocking revelation will have to wait, because what was written on that little white piece of paper would change everything Marcus thought he knew about that afternoon, about that man, and most of all, about his own ability to judge people. Don't leave, because the twist that's about to come will completely change your perspective on this story, and I guarantee you won't be able to believe what really happened that day. Marcus held the card between his fingers, still soaking in the satisfaction of having resolved that embarrassing situation. He felt completely vindicated in his approach. After all, he had protected Premium Motors' exclusive environment and demonstrated to everyone present that he maintained the highest professional standards. In his mind, this was yet another victory in his 15-year career, identifying and removing inappropriate elements from his store. Laura approached him with a worried expression. Her blue eyes held a mixture of embarrassment and discomfort, which Marcus interpreted as admiration for his decisive handling of the situation. "Boss," she said hesitantly, "don't you think you were a little too harsh on that man? I mean, he wasn't being disrespectful or anything." Marcus laughed condescendingly, shaking his head as if Laura still had a lot to learn about the world of high-end business. "Laura, you're still new to this business. Trust me, I've developed an unerring instinct for these things. That man couldn't possibly afford even our cheapest model." He waved the card dismissively, not even bothering to look at it. "It's probably a business card for a local garage or something. Those people are always trying to act important." Ricardo, who had observed the entire interaction from his workstation, also approached. His 15 years of sales experience had taught him to be more cautious in his judgments, and something about the situation deeply bothered him. "Marcus," Ricardo said carefully, "the man seemed genuinely interested, and the way he talked about money, I don't know, there was something different about it. It didn't seem like idle talk." Marcus rolled his eyes, his patience with his subordinates' questioning quickly wearing thin. "Ricardo, how long have you been in this business? You've seen all kinds of people trying to pretend to be someone they're not. Trust me, that guy was just another one." As Marcus defended his actions to his employees, he remained completely oblivious to the small piece of paper he casually held between his fingers. The card that could completely change his understanding of the events that had just occurred remained ignored, waiting for the moment when reality would come crashing back down. The elegant couple, who had been observing the entire interaction, approached Marcus with expressions of approval. The man, dressed in a clearly expensive suit and wearing a watch that cost more than a luxury car, extended his hand to shake Marcus's. "Congratulations on how you handled that situation," the man said with an approving smile. "That's exactly the kind of attitude we expect to find in quality establishments. You maintained the appropriate standards." His wife, a woman in her 50s with discreet but obviously expensive jewelry, nodded in agreement. It was very professional, really. These types of people sometimes forget their place. Marcus felt even more validated by these comments. Real customers were praising his approach, confirming he had made the right decision. He tucked the card into his jacket pocket without even looking at it, his attention fully focused on the customers who truly mattered. "Thank you very much for your understanding," Marcus replied with his most professional smile. "It's precisely this commitment to excellence that sets us apart. Now, how can I help you today?" As Marcus engaged in productive conversation with customers who clearly belonged there, the store's normal activity gradually resumed its usual rhythm. Other salespeople returned to their work, other customers continued to examine the vehicles, and the atmosphere of luxury and exclusivity was completely restored. But not everyone in the store was comfortable with what had happened. Laura remained uneasy, with a persistent feeling that something wasn't right. She'd worked in sales long enough to develop her own instincts about people, and something about the man's behavior deeply intrigued her. "Ricardo," she whispered when Marcus was busy with the elegant couple, "did you notice how that man reacted to everything? He didn't get angry. He didn't get defensive. He didn't try to prove anything. People who are lying about their financial situation usually get agitated when confronted." Ricardo had had exactly the same thought. It's true, and the way he talked about prices, there wasn't even a second of hesitation. When Marcus mentioned 2,200,000, his reaction was as if it were a completely normal amount. "Exactly," Laura agreed. "And did you see how he examined the cars? It wasn't like someone admiring something they could never have. It was like someone actually evaluating a potential purchase." "Dean." The two salespeople exchanged worried glances, but neither had the courage to publicly question Marcus's judgment, especially after he had been praised by other customers for the way he had handled the situation. Meanwhile, outside Premium Motors, the simple-looking man walked calmly down the sidewalk. His expression showed no anger, embarrassment, or any other sign that he was affected by the public humiliation he had just suffered. Instead, his eyes had a thoughtful quality, as if he were mentally processing not only what had happened, but the broader implications of the experience. He stopped in front of a corner cafe and pulled out a phone that, to any attentive observer, looked significantly more sophisticated than his simple attire suggested. The device was clearly state-of-the-art, with features most people wouldn't even know existed. "Jennifer," he said when someone answered on the other end. "It's me. Yes, I'm fine. In fact, I just had a rather educational experience." The voice on the other end was female, professional, and clearly concerned. Even though he couldn't hear her words, he could tell from her reaction that she was inquiring about his well-being. "No, it's nothing serious," he continued, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just a situation that reminded me why certain changes are necessary. Can you start that process we discussed last week?" "Yes, exactly that one." He ended the call and put the phone away, his eyes momentarily returning to the Premium Motors building visible through the cafe window. For a few seconds, his expression showed something that could be interpreted as pity, not anger or revenge, but a kind of genuine sadness for the human nature he had just witnessed. Back at the dealership, Marcus was having what he considered an extremely productive afternoon. The stylish couple had expressed genuine interest in a limited edition Mercedes, and negotiations were progressing favorably. Removing the distracting element had clearly improved the atmosphere in the store, allowing real business to be conducted without inappropriate distractions. This particular model, Marcus explained to the couple, is one of only 20 units that arrived in the country. It is literally an investment that appreciates in value over time. The man nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of exclusivity we're looking for. As for the financing, as Marcus delved into the financial details of the transaction, Laura remained restless at her desk, unable to shake the feeling that something important had been overlooked. She had an excellent memory for faces and details, a skill she had honed during her years in sales, and the more she thought about the man who had left, the more certain details bothered her. First, there was the matter of the phone. Even from a distance, she had noticed that the device he had briefly used looked significantly more sophisticated than any model available in conventional stores. Second, although his clothes were simple, they appeared to be of superior quality upon closer inspection. The fabric of his t-shirt, for example, had a texture that suggested high-quality cotton, not the cheap synthetic material one would expect from someone with limited resources. More importantly, there was something in the man's posture and manner of speaking that didn't align with Marcus's assessment. People who were truly financially strapped, when confronted about their purchasing power, often reacted defensively, nervously, or even aggressively. This man had remained completely calm and articulate throughout the entire interaction. Laura decided to share her observations with Ricardo during a break in activities. "You know what bothered me the most?" she whispered. "The way he said goodbye. Maybe we'll meet again under different circumstances." "What kind of person says that?" Ricardo had noticed the same thing. It almost sounded like he knew something we didn't, like there was more to the story than met the eye. "Exactly," Laura agreed. "And did you see how Marcus didn't even look at the card the man gave him? I mean, regardless of our suspicions, it wouldn't hurt to at least check." They both looked toward Marcus, who remained absorbed in his successful negotiation. The card remained in his jacket pocket, completely forgotten, as he focused on closing a sale that truly mattered. The hours passed, and afternoon gradually gave way to early evening. Premium Motors began preparing for closing, with employees organizing documents, wiping down already spotless surfaces, and positioning cars precisely in their designated positions for the following day. Marcus had managed to close not just one, but two significant sales that afternoon. In addition to the Mercedes for the elegant couple, he had also managed to interest a local businessman in a special edition BMW. His confidence in his professional abilities was at an all-time high. "See," he said to Laura as he organized the afternoon's contracts, "that's why it's important to maintain proper standards. When you remove unnecessary distractions, you can focus on what really matters." Laura nodded politely, but her uneasiness hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown over the next few hours. She'd spent part of the afternoon trying to remember where she might have seen this man before, a lingering sense of familiarity she couldn't quite place. It was while she was sorting through some auto industry magazines that something clicked in her mind. One of the magazines had an article about technological innovations in the automotive sector, and it included photographs of several influential Silicon Valley executives and entrepreneurs. Her heart racing, she began to quickly flip through the pages, searching for something that would confirm or refute the growing suspicion that was forming in her mind. Page after page of executives in expensive suits, entrepreneurs posing with their creations, investors at gala events. And then she saw him. On page 43 was a photograph from a technology conference held a few months earlier. In the center of the image, speaking on the main stage to an audience of thousands, was the same man Marcus had publicly humiliated that afternoon. Laura felt the blood drain from her face as she read the photograph's caption. Her hands began to tremble slightly as she processed the implications of what she was seeing. "My God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ricardo, noticing Laura's dramatic reaction, quickly approached. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Laura lifted the magazine with trembling fingers, pointing to the photograph. "Ricardo, that man, the man Marcus kicked out today." Ricardo stared at the image, his eyes gradually widening as he recognized the familiar face. The photo's caption was clear and unambiguous, identifying not only the man's name, but also his impressive credentials in the tech industry. "This can't be real," Ricardo muttered, taking the magazine from Laura's hands to examine it more closely. "It can't be the same person." But it was. There was no doubt about it. The man in the photograph, despite wearing an expensive suit and speaking to an audience of thousands, had exactly the same face, the same calm expression, the same intelligent eyes that had watched Marcus with that disconcerting calm throughout his public humiliation. "Laura," Ricardo said in a voice that barely concealed the rising panic, "do you know who this person is?" Laura nodded slowly, still in shock. "I know who he is. And Marcus, oh my God, Marcus has no idea what he just did." The two looked at each other, both simultaneously realizing the catastrophic magnitude of the error that had been made. This wasn't just a misjudgment of a potential client. It was something much, much worse. "We have to tell Marcus," Ricardo said urgently. "Tell him what?" Laura asked, still processing the situation, "that he just publicly humiliated one of the most influential men in the tech industry, that he treated someone who probably has a net worth greater than our entire store like a fraud?" Meanwhile, Marcus remained completely oblivious to the disaster he had unleashed. He was in his office, reviewing the afternoon's contracts and planning the next day's sales strategies. The card the man had given him remained forgotten in his jacket pocket, a small piece of paper containing information that could have prevented the biggest professional mistake of his career. The atmosphere in the store had changed dramatically. Laura and Ricardo whispered urgently among themselves, trying to decide how best to inform Marcus of the devastating discovery they had made. Other employees began to notice the commotion, and a sense of tension began to spread through the room. It was at this moment of growing anxiety that the store phone rang. Laura, still in shock, answered automatically. "Premium Motors, good afternoon." The voice on the other end was female, professional, and had a controlled urgency that immediately caught Laura's attention. "Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I'm Mr. Daniel Chen's executive assistant. He was at your store this afternoon, and we need to schedule a meeting with your general manager for tomorrow morning." Laura felt as if the world had stopped spinning. The name Daniel Chen confirmed her worst suspicions, and the fact that his assistant was calling to schedule a meeting suggested that significant consequences were on the way. "One moment, please," Laura managed, covering the mouthpiece of the phone with a trembling hand. "Marcus!" she shouted across the store, her voice filled with urgency that made everyone stop what they were doing. Marcus emerged from his office, irritated by the interruption. "What's up, Laura? I'm trying to finalize today's contracts." Laura pointed to the phone, her words coming out rushed with urgency. "There's a call. It's the assistant of the man who was here today. She wants to schedule a meeting." "What man?" asked Marcus, genuinely confused. "The man you kicked out," Ricardo said, approaching with the magazine still in his hands. "Marcus, you need to see this. Now." Marcus picked up the phone, still not fully grasping the gravity of the unfolding situation. "Hello? Good afternoon," said the professional voice on the other end. "Mr. Marcus Rodriguez. I'm Jennifer Williams, executive assistant to Mr. Daniel Chen. My boss asked me to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. "Daniel Chen," Marcus repeated, the name meaning absolutely nothing to him. "Sorry, but I'm not familiar." "The gentleman who visited your store this afternoon," Jennifer interrupted. "He was interested in some of your vehicles, but there was, shall we say, a misunderstanding about your qualifications as a customer." It was at this moment that the pieces began to fall into place in Marcus's mind. The shabbily dressed man, the card he had given, and now an executive assistant calling to schedule a formal meeting. "One moment," Marcus said, his voice beginning to show the first signs of anxiety. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small white card he had completely ignored all afternoon. With fingers that were beginning to tremble slightly, Marcus finally, for the first time, looked at what was written on that small piece of paper. What he saw made his world instantly collapse. Now you're wondering what exactly Marcus saw on that card, aren't you? And what will be the true impact of this meeting scheduled for the next day? I can guarantee you won't believe the twist that's about to unfold. Let us know in the comments what you think will happen, because the truth behind this story is more incredible than any of you can imagine. What Marcus saw on that small white card instantly changed his understanding of everything that had happened that afternoon. The card was elegant in its simplicity, printed on high-quality paper with sophisticated typography that whispered exclusivity. In the center, in discreet but clear letters, was written, "Daniel Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Quantum Innovations, Inc." But it wasn't just the name or the title that made Marcus's blood run cold. Below this basic information was an additional line that turned his growing anxiety into outright panic. Fortune 500, rank year 73, estimated net worth $8.7 billion. Marcus had to read this information 3 times before it truly sank into his consciousness. $8.7 billion, not millions, billions, with a capital B. The man he had publicly humiliated, called unsuitable, and essentially thrown out of his store was one of the richest businessmen in the world. "Mr. Rodriguez?" Jennifer Williams's voice was still on the phone, professional, but with a patience that was clearly being tested. "Are you listening to me?" Marcus was so shocked he'd completely forgotten he was still holding the phone. His breathing was becoming ragged, and he could feel a cold sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the store's efficient air conditioning. Yes, I'm here," he managed to reply, his voice sounding strange and distant even to his own ears. Did you say Daniel Chen?" "Exactly," Jennifer confirmed. "And about the meeting tomorrow at 9. Does that work with your schedule?" Marcus glanced around the store, seeing Laura and Ricardo watching him with expressions of growing concern. The magazine lay open on the table, and he could partially see the photograph that had caused so much alarm among his employees. Slowly, the pieces of the puzzle began to form in his mind, creating an image that was as terrifying as it was humiliating. "Miss Williams," Marcus said, his voice now clearly trembling, "may I ask, what exactly is the purpose of this meeting?" There was a significant pause on the other end of the line before Jennifer answered. When she spoke again, her voice remained professional, but there was an underlying coolness that hadn't been present before. "Mr. Chen would like to discuss some business opportunities related to his experience today at Premium Motors. He was particularly impressed with the level of customer service he received." The way she said particularly impressed made it clear she wasn't referring to a positive impression. Marcus swallowed hard, feeling as if the ground was disappearing from under his feet. "Sure," he managed. 9 in the morning will be perfect." "Excellent. Mr. Chen will be accompanied by some colleagues. You can expect a meeting of approximately 1 hour. Have a good rest of the day, Mr. Rodriguez." The call ended, and Marcus stood there holding the phone for several seconds before realizing the conversation was over. Laura and Ricardo approached immediately, their faces showing a mixture of concern and, if Marcus was honest with himself, a certain barely concealed satisfaction at seeing his arrogance turn to panic. "Marcus," Laura said cautiously, "have you seen the magazine?" Marcus nodded mechanically, still processing the catastrophic implications of what he had discovered. He walked slowly to the table where the magazine lay open and stared at the photograph of the man he had humiliated only hours before. In the image, Daniel Chen was on the main stage at the International Technology Conference, speaking to an audience of over 5,000 people. The article was titled "The Visionaries Shaping the Future, Daniel Chen and the Quantum Computing Revolution." The article detailed how his company, Quantum Innovations, had revolutionized multiple industries and how his personal wealth had grown exponentially over the past 5 years. But what caught Marcus's attention most was a specific paragraph in the middle of the article. Known for his personal modesty and simple lifestyle, Chen is often seen wearing casual clothes even during high-profile meetings. "I judge people by character and competence, not appearance," Chen said in a recent interview. "Unfortunately, I've found that many in the business world still make judgments based on superficialities." Marcus had to sit down. The implications of what he had done were becoming increasingly clear, and each one was worse than the last. He had not only insulted a potentially valuable client, he had publicly humiliated one of the most powerful and influential men in the world, someone whose mere mention could open or close doors in any industry. "How many people were in the store when this happened?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ricardo and Laura looked at each other before answering. "There were at least 6 or 7 customers," Ricardo said, "and all the employees saw it. And some of them clearly recognized what was happening," Laura added. "That elegant couple was praising you for how you handled the situation." Marcus groaned audibly. The situation was getting worse by the second. Not only had he made a catastrophic mistake, but he had done so in front of witnesses who would likely spread the story. In an industry where reputation was everything, where relationships and networking determined success or failure, he had created the kind of situation that could instantly destroy a career. "What have I done?" Marcus muttered to himself, putting his head in his hands. "What have I done?" Laura, despite her own anxiety about the implications for the entire store, felt a pang of pity for her boss. "Marcus, maybe it's not as bad as it seems. I mean, maybe he just wants to, I don't know, clear up the misunderstanding?" Marcus looked up, his eyes a mixture of despair and skepticism. "Laura, you read the article. This man is worth nearly $9 billion. He doesn't schedule formal meetings to clear up misunderstandings. People like him have assistants who call to schedule meetings when there are consequences to discuss." The reality of the situation was becoming increasingly clear to everyone in the store. News of what had happened spread quickly among the employees, creating an atmosphere of tension and anxiety that contrasted sharply with the otherwise calm, upscale atmosphere that characterized Premium Motors. While Marcus tried to process the implications of his actions, Daniel Chen sat in his private office, an executive suite located on the 40th floor of one of the city's most modern buildings. The contrast between his work environment and his personal appearance was even more pronounced there. Glass walls offered panoramic views of the city. Designer furniture created an ambiance of utmost sophistication, and cutting-edge technology was seamlessly integrated into every surface. Jennifer Williams, his executive assistant of more than 8 years, sat across his mahogany desk, taking notes on a tablet as they discussed the day's events. "What was his reaction when you mentioned the meeting?" Daniel asked, his voice maintaining that same calm that had characterized their interaction at the dealership. "Interesting," Jennifer replied. "First, he clearly had no idea who you were. When I mentioned your name, there was no recognition whatsoever. But when I explained that you had visited the store, I could hear the exact moment he began to grasp the magnitude of the situation." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. In his 20 years building a business empire, he had encountered all kinds of people. Some had tried to take advantage of his modest appearance, others had shown prejudice, but he had never experienced anything as blatant and public as what had happened that afternoon at Premium Motors. "What about the background research you did on the store?" Daniel asked. Jennifer consulted her notes. "Premium Motors is an established dealership operating for 12 years. It has a good overall reputation and a high-end clientele. The owner is a man named Roberto Silva, who seems to be respected in the industry. Marcus Rodriguez has been the general manager for 5 years and has an impressive sales track record. Impressive sales record, Daniel repeated. But clearly some significant deficiencies in character judgment. Jennifer had worked with Daniel long enough to recognize when he was processing something more complex than a simple emotional reaction. Do you have anything specific in mind for tomorrow? Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the city view outside the window. Throughout his career, he had learned that moments of adversity and injustice often became opportunities for positive change. The humiliation he had suffered that afternoon wasn't just about him. It was symptomatic of larger problems in the way people judged and treated each other. "I have some ideas," he said finally. "But first, I want to better understand the dynamics of that store. The manager's behavior was clearly problematic, but what about the other employees? What about the customers who witnessed it all?" "I'm already looking into that," Jennifer replied. "I have some contacts who can provide additional information about Premium Motors' corporate culture and Mr. Rodriguez's specific background." While Daniel planned his response to the humiliation, Marcus was spending the longest night of his career. He had cancelled his personal plans and stayed late at the store, trying to imagine every possible scenario for the next day's meeting. Each scenario he could visualize was worse than the last. His mind obsessively replayed every moment of his interaction with Daniel Chen, analyzing every word he'd said, every facial expression he'd made, every gesture he'd used. What he'd interpreted as professional confidence and upholding the store's standards now seemed rude, prejudiced, and inexcusably arrogant. At 10 o'clock at night, Marcus finally decided to go home, but sleep didn't come easily. He stayed up until the early hours of the morning, surfing the internet and reading everything he could find about Daniel Chen and Quantum Innovations Inc. The more he read, the worse he felt. Daniel Chen wasn't just rich, he was a globally respected figure, known for his philanthropy, his groundbreaking technological innovations, and ironically, for his ethical values and respectful treatment of all people, regardless of their social standing or appearance. There were articles about how he still regularly had lunch with employees at all levels of his company, how he maintained friendships from his days as a junior programmer struggling to make ends meet, and how he was often seen in down-to-earth restaurants and ordinary shops, always treating everyone with the same respect and courtesy. One particularly poignant article described how Daniel had grown up in a hard-working immigrant family, how he had faced discrimination and prejudice in his youth, and how these experiences had shaped his philosophy on life and business. "I've never forgotten what it's like to be judged by appearance or background," he had said in an interview. "That's why I always make a point of treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of any superficiality." Marcus closed his laptop at 3 in the morning, knowing he had only a few hours before the meeting that could determine the rest of his career. His last hours of sleep were plagued by dreams in which he constantly relived the humiliation he had inflicted on Daniel Chen, but this time from the victim's perspective. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Premium Motors at 7 o'clock, 2 hours before the scheduled meeting. He wanted time to prepare himself mentally, review everything he'd learned about Daniel Chen, and perhaps formulate some kind of strategy to minimize the disaster he'd created. Laura arrived shortly after, clearly as anxious as Marcus about what was to come. "How are you feeling?" she asked cautiously. "As someone who's about to have the most important and potentially devastating conversation of their professional career," Marcus replied honestly. "What about you? How's the rest of the team doing?" "Everyone's nervous," Laura admitted. "Ricardo barely slept. The other salespeople are worried about what this might mean for the store as a whole." It was a legitimate concern. If Daniel Chen decided to take legal action or simply spread the word about what had happened, the consequences could extend far beyond Marcus. The reputation of the entire premium motors company could be damaged, potentially impacting everyone's jobs. At 8:45 in the morning, Marcus was strategically positioned near the main entrance, wearing his best suit and trying to look more confident than he felt. His hands were slightly damp with sweat, and he had to make a conscious effort to control his breathing. At 9 o'clock sharp, 3 black luxury cars pulled up in front of Premium Motors. The first was a discreet but clearly expensive executive sedan. The second was an imposing SUV with tinted windows. The third was another sedan, equally elegant. Jennifer Williams, a professional woman in her 30s, wearing an impeccable charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase, stepped out of the first car. A tall, bespectacled man, clearly a lawyer, emerged from the second car, followed by an older woman with an aura of authority that suggested years of experience in high-level negotiations. And from the third car came Daniel Chen. Even knowing who he was, Marcus was struck again by the simplicity of his appearance. Daniel wore dark jeans, a navy polo shirt, and casual leather shoes. The only difference from the day before was that his clothes looked slightly more expensive up close, but they still retained that understated quality that had fooled Marcus the day before. What struck Marcus most was the complete absence of pomp or circumstance. Daniel didn't arrive like a billionaire tycoon flexing his wealth and power. He arrived like someone attending a routine business meeting with the same calm, observant expression he'd maintained throughout the previous day's humiliation. Jennifer Williams was the first to enter the store, followed by the 2 consultants, and finally Daniel. Marcus stepped forward immediately, his rehearsed opening line ready to be delivered. "Mr. Chen," Marcus began, his voice sounding louder and more nervous than he intended, "thank you so much for coming. I wanted to start by saying that..." Daniel gently raised a hand, interrupting Marcus with a gesture that wasn't rude, but made it clear he preferred to control the flow of the conversation. "Mr. Rodriguez," he said in that same calm voice, "before anything else, I'd like a few minutes to speak with your staff, if you don't mind." Marcus blinked, completely taken aback. He'd prepared himself for apologies, explanations, maybe even pleas, but he hadn't considered that Daniel might want to talk to others first. "My employees," Marcus repeated. "Yes," Daniel confirmed. "Specifically, I'd like to speak with the young blonde woman who was organizing documents yesterday and the man who was working on the computer. They witnessed our interaction, and I'd like to get their perspective on what happened." Laura and Ricardo, who had been watching nervously from a distance, approached hesitantly when Daniel waved at them. Marcus felt a new wave of anxiety. He hadn't considered that his actions would be observed and judged not only by Daniel, but also by his own employees. "Are you Laura and Ricardo?" Daniel asked, consulting some notes Jennifer had given him. "Yes, sir," they both replied simultaneously, their voices showing a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. "Excellent. I'd like to hear your honest impressions of what you witnessed yesterday. And please be completely frank. There will be no negative consequences for you, regardless of what you say." Laura glanced quickly at Marcus before answering. "Mr. Chen, we were uncomfortable with how the situation was handled. Not because we questioned Marcus's judgment of clients, but because something seemed different about you." "Different how?" Daniel asked, genuinely interested. Ricardo joined the conversation. "Your reaction to the prices, for example. Most people who can't actually afford cars like these are visibly shocked when they hear the prices. You reacted as if they were completely normal numbers for you. And your body posture," Laura added, gaining confidence. "People who are pretending to have money often get defensive when questioned. You remained completely calm, almost as if you were sizing us up, rather than trying to impress us." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "And how did you feel about the way I was treated?" Laura and Ricardo exchanged glances again. It was Ricardo who answered first. "Honestly, we're embarrassed. Even if you couldn't afford anything, we think the treatment was unnecessarily rude. Everyone deserves to be treated with basic respect. And after you left, Laura continued, we were still bothered, so much so that we spent the afternoon trying to figure out why you looked familiar. That's when we found your picture in the magazine. Daniel smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had ever seen from him. And how did you feel when you found out who I was? Shocked, Laura admitted, and worried about the consequences for all of us. But also, Ricardo added hesitantly, we also felt there was an important lesson there about not judging people by their appearance. Marcus watched this entire exchange, feeling progressively worse. Not only had he made a catastrophic mistake, but he had done so while his own employees had demonstrated more wisdom and instinct than he had. Daniel turned to Marcus. Mr. Rodriguez, your staff has demonstrated both professionalism and insight. Now I would like to speak with you privately. Marcus waved, directing Daniel to his glass office. Jennifer Williams and the two consultants remained in the main hall, watching the cars and occasionally taking notes. Once in the room, Daniel sat calmly, his hands resting peacefully in his lap. Marcus remained standing, too nervous to sit. Mr. Rodriguez, Daniel began, I would like you to tell me, in your own words, how you interpreted our interaction yesterday. Marcus swallowed hard. Mr. Chen, I made a terrible mistake. I judged you based on superficial appearances and treated you completely inappropriately. There is no excuse for my behavior. That's a fair assessment, Daniel agreed. But I'd like to understand more deeply. What exactly led you to conclude that I wasn't a legitimate customer? Marcus felt like he was being dissected, but he knew he had to be completely honest. Your clothes looked ordinary, not expensive, and you were alone. Most of our high-value clients bring assistants or consultants, and your posture was very relaxed for someone in an environment that should be intimidating. Interesting, Daniel said. So you based your assessment entirely on external signs, without making any attempt to really get to know the person? Yes, Marcus admitted miserably, and I know how wrong that was. Daniel was silent for several seconds, studying Marcus with those intelligent eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice maintained its characteristic calm, but there was an underlying gravity that made Marcus understand that his next words would determine his future. Mr. Rodriguez, you publicly humiliated not only me, but also the fundamental philosophy that all people deserve dignity and respect. You did this in front of employees and customers and turned what could have been a positive business interaction into a display of prejudice and arrogance. Marcus nodded, unable to say anything in his defense. Normally, Daniel continued, in situations like this, I would simply take my business elsewhere and let the market sort itself out. But this situation is different because it represents something bigger than a simple commercial misunderstanding. Marcus felt his heart race. Mr. Chen, I accept full responsibility for my actions. If there's anything I can do to remedy it, Daniel raised his hand again. Actually, there is something you can do, something that can turn this catastrophic mistake into an opportunity for growth and positive change. Marcus looked at Daniel with a mixture of hope and confusion. Anything. I'll do anything. Good, Daniel said, slowly standing up, because what I have in mind will require significant changes not just in you, but in this entire organization. And it was then that Daniel Chen revealed what the real consequence of this whole situation would be, a proposal that no one, especially Marcus, could have imagined. Daniel Chen walked slowly to the window of Marcus's room, watching the movement on the street for a few seconds before turning around with that serene expression that had become his trademark throughout this extraordinary situation. Mr. Rodriguez, Daniel said, yesterday when I left this store after being publicly humiliated, I could have simply moved on. After all, I have enough resources to buy any car I want, anywhere in the world. Marcus swallowed hard, knowing that every word Daniel spoke was sealing his professional fate. But on my walk back to the office, Daniel continued, I started thinking about something bigger. How many other people go through similar situations every day? How many people are judged and rejected simply because they don't fit superficial stereotypes? Daniel approached Marcus's desk, placing both hands on the glass surface. And then it occurred to me that this situation could become a unique opportunity to create real, meaningful change. Marcus remained silent, completely unable to predict where this conversation was going. That's why, Daniel said with a smile that contained a mixture of irony and determination, I decided to buy Premium Motors. Marcus's world stopped spinning. He blinked several times, certain he had heard wrong. Buy the store? He managed to whisper. The entire dealership, Daniel confirmed calmly. I already spoke with Roberto Silva this morning. He was quite receptive to the offer, especially after Jennifer explained yesterday's events. Marcus felt his legs weaken and finally sat heavily in his chair. And you're wondering what this means for you, Daniel continued, clearly reading the look of utter panic on Marcus's face. Well, I have an interesting proposal. Daniel walked to the living room door and waved to Jennifer, who approached with a folder. You can stay, Daniel said, opening the folder, but under very specific conditions. Marcus stared at the documents Daniel placed on his desk, trying to focus on the words that seemed to dance across the page. First, Daniel said, you will participate in an intensive training program on diversity, inclusion, and customer service. Not a 1-hour online course. A serious, comprehensive program lasting 3 months. Marcus nodded quickly, ready to agree to anything. Second, you will work directly with me for 6 months, learning how to identify real value in people instead of making judgments based on appearances. Daniel turned a page in the contract. And third, this store will become a pilot model for a new kind of luxury dealership, one that treats all people with dignity and respect, regardless of how they dress or where they come from. Marcus looked at Daniel with an expression of utter disbelief. You're offering me a second chance. I'm offering an opportunity for growth, Daniel corrected. For you, for your employees, and for all future clients who walk through these doors. Daniel leaned in slightly, his eyes locking with Marcus's. But understand one thing very clearly. If you accept this proposal, there will be no second chances. Any sign that you have returned to old habits, any evidence of bias or poor judgment, and you will be removed immediately and permanently. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes, a mixture of gratitude, humiliation, and overwhelming relief that almost left him unable to speak. I accept, he said in a choked voice. I accept completely. Daniel smiled, the first genuinely warm smile Marcus had ever seen from him. Excellent. Jennifer has all the details about the training program. You'll start on Monday. Daniel headed for the door, but stopped and turned around one last time. Oh, and Marcus, that yellow Lamborghini I was checking out yesterday, I'll take it. And the red Ferrari too, and probably 3 or 4 other models I saw in the showroom. Marcus's jaw literally dropped. You're going to buy 5 cars. For starters, Daniel said casually, I need some vehicles to test our new customer service protocols. As Daniel left the room, Marcus stood alone for a few moments, trying to process the most extraordinary turn of events in his professional life. The man he had humiliated had not only forgiven his terrible behavior, but was offering an opportunity for redemption far beyond what anyone could have hoped for. In the months that followed, Premium Motors' transformation became legendary in the industry. The store implemented new service protocols that became a model for dealerships across the country. Marcus, after completing his training program, became one of the most respected managers in the industry, known specifically for his ability to treat all customers with equal dignity and respect. Laura and Ricardo were promoted to leadership positions, helping train other employees in the new service methods. The story of how Premium Motors had been transformed by Daniel Chen's vision spread quickly, attracting customers from all walks of life who wanted to experience a different kind of luxury service. And Daniel Chen, he continued to visit the store regularly, always dressed in his simple clothes, always treating all employees as equals, always reminding everyone that a person's true worth can never be measured by superficial appearances. 6 months after the initial humiliation, Marcus was at his desk when a young man walked into the store. The man wore ripped jeans, a worn t-shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days. Several younger employees glanced in Marcus's direction, curious to see how he would react. Marcus stood up with a genuine smile and walked towards the young visitor. "Good afternoon," Marcus said warmly. "Welcome to Premium Motors. How can I help you today?" The boy seemed surprised by the warm welcome. I was just looking. I'm not sure if I can afford anything here." "No problem at all," Marcus replied. "Everyone is welcome to look. And who knows, maybe we'll find something that works for you. Do you have a specific model in mind?" As Marcus guided the young man around the showroom, patiently explaining the features of each vehicle without making any judgments about his purchasing power, Daniel Chen watched discreetly from his new office on the second floor. Jennifer approached him. "How does it feel to see the transformation?" Daniel smiled, watching Marcus treat the young visitor with the same respect and attention he would give any millionaire client. "You know, Jennifer," he said, "sometimes people's biggest mistakes become their biggest opportunities for growth. Marcus isn't just a better manager now, he's become a better person. And that's the truth behind this incredible story. Sometimes, when we think we know someone based solely on appearance, we are missing out on the opportunity to meet someone extraordinary." Daniel Chen could have destroyed Marcus Rodriguez's career that afternoon. Instead, he chose to create something greater, an opportunity for growth, learning, and real change. The next time you find yourself making snap judgments about someone based on how they dress or speak, remember this story. Remember that behind every simple appearance can hide an extraordinary person, and that treating everyone with dignity and respect is not only the right thing to do, it can also be the smartest decision you ever make. What about you? Have you ever judged someone based on their appearance and later discovered you were completely wrong? Or perhaps you've been unfairly judged yourself? Leave your story in the comments. I'd love to hear your experiences. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you reflect on how we treat people in our daily lives, leave a like so more people can see this important message. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because I have many other true stories like this one that will make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature. Thank you for sticking with me until the end of this incredible journey. See you in the next story.